Soul Butter, a tiny talk about big things. So much talk, so little makes sense these days. What do you do when something much wiser than the mind you use to get through a day starts talking to you? A voice beyond what's familiar. And how can you make it work for you beyond the spin in this world? Start listening today. Join Susan Gabriel from the inside out with special guests, songs, students, and stories as we introduce Soul Butter, a tiny talk about big things. Light notes from the SuzeMuze. Hi, everybody. I am your host, the SuzeMuze, Susan Gabriel, and I'm thrilled to have a wonderful person join us today, Sister Marion Defeis from the St. Joseph community in New York. She has been a wonderful power of example in my life, and she has a wonderful way of moving about in the world, and she's done many, many things, and she's going to share a tidbit today. But mostly I'm interested in her inspired movement to become a sister and how she's practiced what she calls impelled by the Spirit. That has been at the core of a lot of the actions that she has taken in her life and a lot of the ways that she's lived and been of service to so many people, present company included. Hello. So why don't you give us a hint of how you began at this wonderful community that is called, it's known as I was reading, it's known as Sisters of St. Joseph, were known as the Congregation of the Great Love of God.
I always wanted to be a teacher. I remember when I was very young, I had this real desire to teach. And my high school years were years of working with and being taught by the Sisters of St. Joseph. Impressed me very much. I really enjoyed being with the sisters. I was very taken with their intelligence, their goodness, and I wanted to be like them. And so after I graduated from Bishop McDonald, where the sisters taught, I entered the convent of the Sisters of St. Joseph in September of 1951. So that means many, many years ago. And it has proven to be a wonderful way for me to live my life.
Your life moved into many different communities and forms, and one of the things that struck me is that you were very involved in the corrections, in ministering to people in corrections, and I noted that when you first went to be of service there, somebody said to you, "I hope you don't think you're going to save anyone." And you smiled and said, I was confident that Jesus had already accomplished salvation. That's how I'm reading in your autobiography. And when you talk about following the lead of the Spirit, this is where I think we can all come together to listen carefully to what your experience has been in terms of seeing the needs and how you see things. How do you intuit the direction that you follow when you're ministering to people? I know you were of great service to the women on Rikers Island and had a lot to do with changing the Rockefeller laws, which is a whole other show altogether. But just so you all know, folks at home, Marion is quite the adventurer in the world, and her prayer and her action are equally impactful. So that said, can you talk about how it is for you as you move through what you have received as your assignments in communities? What is it that you listen for in terms of direction? And
interestingly enough, although I was drawn to the Sisters of St. Joseph to be a teacher, I was only a teacher for about 17 years when I realized that I wanted to do other things. I just felt called or impelled to work with the poor, the oppressed, the disadvantaged people. And so I began a ministry of living with people who were homeless, homeless and formerly incarcerated women. And I also began working as a chaplain on Rikers Island. And I worked there for about 23 years and really loved being with the women that I was ministering to. There was a great need at that point for women chaplains because so many women were being held up at JFK for bringing in drugs. Some of the women did it because they needed cash. Others were carrying the drugs in and not even knowing that they were drugs. So, but they were facing very difficult sentences for having these drugs. As much as 15 to 25 years to life in prison, simply for carrying two ounces of drugs at that time was a really terrible scene, and these were a result of the Rockefeller drug laws. So I worked with the women and fortunately was able to get many women out of jail and on to much better lives than when I had first met them.
Remarkable, remarkable. And as you move through that climate of, you got involved in your service to the women directly, in addition to which you really took the bull by the horns to get the law changed, didn't you?
And I really felt for those women, and they came from many different countries and landed in JFK.
And your activism, the national media got involved, and I also noted that you would go to prayer, and again, this phrase, impelled by the Spirit, you would listen for where you were to go next. You would listen for, you got involved with the politicians, you followed direction, you were a real activist. And but the continuous thread through all this work, from your own prayer that led you to become a sister, to being a servant of these women, to moving through various communities of service and asking where you should go next. I noticed when you describe how you would pray or how you would ask when you didn't know which way to go. One time you went to prayer and said, beyond the Rockefeller experience, the Rockefeller laws, and that was a whole new world for you, right? The political world and the press and all these other things and changing laws. But you followed it step by step, and you, according to prayer, and also you listened to who was an expert in this, and journalists and that, and you continued to carry that cause. And then when you didn't know where to go next, you went to prayer. And one time you said the only thing that came back to you was the word Brooklyn, that you were under the Verrazano Bridge with your car sitting there wondering where you should go next. And the word Brooklyn came, and it was from there that you went to Coney Island and became a leader in that community of Providence House, which was a place for women who were bridging back to life, would come and live and go out to work. And you were part of the mentoring uh, supervisors in that home, right?
Yes, that was quite an experience when I was working in Suffolk County as a religious ed coordinator. And I knew that after being there for 10 years, I just felt impelled by the Spirit to work a little bit more with women who were, who needed help, and different people in my community were doing different ministries. And I remember there was one sister working in Brazil, another sister was working in California with the migrants, and they both asked me to join them. And so I remember sitting, as Susan explained, under the Verrazano Bridge in Brooklyn at that time, and asking for guidance, and asking the Lord, where I should go. What did the Lord want me to do? I knew there was something, but wasn't clear what that was until I stopped for a few minutes, and all of a sudden I heard one word, and it was very clear. It just said Brooklyn. And I startled because I was sitting there under the Verrazano Bridge in Brooklyn. What did that mean? And that was the beginning of a search in Brooklyn for my next ministry, which was the realization that the Sisters of St. Joseph had begun to open their convents to formerly incarcerated women and women who were battered, and women who were just poor, homeless. And so I worked in Flatbush and in Brooklyn, and then I spent a good deal of time in Coney Island, in the Providence House that was open to the women who really needed assistance at that point. So yes, and I really loved being in that part of the world because I loved walking each day on the boardwalk of Coney Island, after work or especially on weekends.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that Marion taught me how to do was what she would call waste time. And we live in a world that's the last thing the world will tell you to take time out to do. And Marion, I visited her there at Coney Island, and right there off the beach, and I walked that boardwalk with you, and there was a lovely garden there. And I can tell everyone that Marion is from an Italian family, and she cooks the best spaghetti. She knows how to do those noodles, the spaghetti, the al dente. But it was such a welcoming experience for anybody who would come and visit you there. And for the women there, it was just a beautiful, harmonic community, gorgeous garden in the backyard. It was a beautiful living experience to offer to people who had been wounded in the world, sometimes by the world, and were themselves looking for direction, looking for a way. And this gave them the way. And it was your listening deep within, and one thing leading to another, this quiet connectivity that goes on in this very loud world that leads to changing lives and moving lives according to the direction that your life to me has always looked very harmonious. You listen deep and you go, and the way opens. And that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. One of the things you were talking about is that the vow of obedience in the spiritual practice changed from being obedient to a superior at a certain time, and it became being obedient to the spirit. And you write about that in your autobiography. If you could talk to that it's not out there, the spiritual listening for your own mentorship, your own higher power, if you will. You listen from within, and it is the openness of heart, is what the discernment that you brought you to Brooklyn came through the openness of the heart, would you say? Can you speak to that?
Yes, you explained that very well. It's true that when I entered the Sisters of St. Joseph, I did take a vow of obedience, and it was at that time a vow to obey the superior. And I remember being changed very frequently before I got involved with the formerly incarcerated women. I was involved in many different convents. Finally realized was that the vow of obedience is really not a vow to obey superiors, but it was a vow to listen to the spirit within us. And it's that spirit within us that's guiding us. And so I allow the spirit to take over. And that was a very important part of my journey. This notion of, or the feeling of being impelled to move from one place to another. And so that's how I try to live my life, is being open to the spirit and being willing to take on whatever the spirit was offering me.
It's so fascinating because I've also known you to experience, you talk about the humor of God, but your adventurous work in the world that has taken you beyond a lot of limits. You've also traveled a lot. You've been doing that. You have a lot of friends all over the world. And I would talk to Marion and she'd be going off to California. So it's so interesting to me. The harmony of your life is fascinating, that things just happen for you. Do you feel that you've had a wonderful balance in all of this, your mission and the muse of your life? Because you do talk about God's sense of humor, but also the joy that you've had and the friends that you've met, and how every time I watch Marion travel somewhere, she doesn't go through these other things that a lot of us have gone through at airports. It seems like she just gets on the plane and someone serves her something and it's all cool. So, or that, I don't think I'm imagining that. You seem to move between the seams with great ease. Things, you always tell me, well, it all worked out very well, and if there's like a traffic jam, it just somehow you get there, it just all works out very well. You've said that to me many times over the years. And by the way, if you don't mind me saying, Marion's been on this planet for, may I say how long?
Of course.
90. Watch my lips. And those of you who can't see it in audio, but 90 years, ladies and gentlemen. And so from this 18-year-old girl, but always listening to that deeper, still voice, correct? Would you not say? Yeah?
Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm.
So in today's world, which is, you've been in today's world for all those 90 years, but would you not agree that it's quite challenging, especially at this moment, to not be feeling a lot of chaos and perhaps a little unnerving and all these things shifting around us? How do you practice this internal your life, your way of life? How do you practice being impelled by the Spirit? Is it harder to maintain that, or is that your safe haven? And because that's as real for you as taking a breath for the rest of us, right? That listening.
And at this point in my life, actually, I'm 91 years old.
Did I miss a birthday?
I, I I'm presently living in an assisted living convent here in Brentwood, in our mother house. This is where I came that many years ago, and I feel very, very good about being here. You know, it's just a time now for beautiful walks around our campus here. Many free times to pray and to read. It's to interact with the sisters that I live with here. It's been a wonderful experience, and I feel the presence of the Spirit. I feel it very, very much. So I feel very grateful that I am now able to just slow down and enjoy the peace that's here, the quiet, and the ability to go wherever I feel a sense of ministry. So it's been a good life, and I've been very, very grateful.
Well, you are definitely a blessing in our world. There's no question about that. One of the things that you have been, and by the way, I can say it is a beautiful campus. It is a field after field, and I know you love the sunsets, and it's just a wonderful community. And yeah, I was very blessed to visit you there. One of the things you still conduct, or you have conducted in the past, I went on one of these, an Ignatian retreat, which a lot of people find to be a gateway into the kind of deep listening prayer that you're speaking of, where you can listen for that internal voice that speaks to you. And what is it about the Ignatian retreat, that that you find to be so powerful? Because you must have conducted hundreds of them. And I know a few people like me whose lives were changed by these.
Well, that is true about the Ignatian exercises. It's a powerful tool for learning to be still, and know the presence of God. And many people who have gone through this Ignatian exercise have had their lives transformed. And in fact, I can say that about myself. It's after I made an Ignatian retreat, after I was a sister for about 20 years. And that propelled me to be more in touch with the Spirit. And it gave me a way of being in touch. It forced me to realize how important it is to pray, to be aware of God's Spirit within us.
And if we were to see that tool as an orchestra, you are the best conductor I've ever seen on a retreat like that. You can tell that I'm a fan of Marion's. And so with the beautiful way that you are in how things move around you as you move through the world and are of service to so many, it's such an intimate, personal thing. You still see people. Your focus is so gentle, yet it's so powerful in my experience. You're very present. Do you think is that the world is in a place that it can receive this kind of focus or needs this kind of focus? How do you see the world today? And do you struggle with the world from the point of view of your own practice or what you see going on around you in terms of discerning God's presence in some of these things that don't seem to be so godly?
Well, I'm saddened by what's going on in the world today, um, and especially what's going on in our own country. I think we're living in perilous times, and it's times when we really need to be in touch with the Spirit to know what to do and how to do it. So I just am in great sympathy with people who are really suffering because of what's happening in our country, especially our immigrants. It's very difficult for them, and I think it's just a treacherous time. So I think we all need to pray to get in touch with the Spirit and to do whatever it is that we can do to bring back a sense of the fact that we're all brothers and sisters, and Jesus had only one commandment: love one another as I have loved you, and that we need to honor the people that we meet each day, and especially those who are disenchanted. And so, yes, I feel very sad for what's happening here, and hope that a turnaround will be coming soon.
That's beautiful. And the power of prayer is something that a lot of people may not think has power, right?
Mm-hmm.
But your experience is otherwise, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, when you were talking about daily prayer and how important that is, a necessity for daily life, that it's what has allowed you to respond over these years to all the things going on in our world. Impelled by the Spirit, your suggestion that people take time to, as you say, trace the Spirit's action in your life. What do you mean by that? Tracing the Spirit's action in a person's life, just to help somebody who wants to jump on the path in this way.
Well, just taking the time each day to pray, to be quiet, to be open. To see the power that they have within themselves to bring about goodness in the world.
And one of the other things that you remark about in your story is, and this is big, I think this is very big, a lot of people, because we're all programmed to have control, right? And to control things. The system tells us that. And yet the invitation of prayer is to let go and let God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you work with people, and you yourself, have you ever dealt with wanting to control something that you couldn't? How do you surrender that, get out of your own way? Because you even talk about how the most arduous spiritual task is that of giving up control. How do you approach that and encourage other people to approach it? Can you make any suggestions?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a big one.
Yeah. And I think it's through prayer, to be taking time out to sit and quietly be open to whatever it is that the Spirit is calling us to do. But we need to take the time. It's not something that happens on the run. So that would be my suggestion. And if anyone is looking for a very important, a very strong way to hear the words of Jesus, I'd recommend them to read the book, Jesus Calling. It's a book that was written by a Protestant laywoman, and it's probably the most powerful book that I have read. And I use it as my way of being connected each morning as I read the reflection in this book. It's a reflection of each day of the year. So it's a very simple suggestion, but I think it's one that I have found very helpful. And when I've recommended it to other people, they have found it very helpful as a way of connecting with the Spirit within. Calling Jesus by Sarah Young.
Thank you. Yeah. Marion likes book clubs too, so she's got all kinds of books that she reads. And you've been conducting this book club or participating. It's been going on for how many years?
5 years now. Yeah. We've read some wonderful books, and I love to read, so I'm very pleased with the group that I'm reading with, because they seem to like this. We're literally on the same page, so it's a lot of fun.
That's great. Yeah. And you've read to children in hospitals and sisters in hospitals, haven't you, for years?
Yeah. Well, after I retired from working on Rikers Island, I wanted another ministry, and was drawn to Montefiore Children's Hospital, where I was someone who could read to little children and also to be of help to their parents, because the children there many times would be with their mothers, especially. Mm-hmm. So it was a beautiful ministry that I was able to have for a few years.
We're coming to the end of our chat for the day. That doesn't mean we won't have Marion come back, because I could talk to you for hours, and I'm sure people are going to want to hear more from you. What would you say, because again, looking at the world that we're living in today, one of the things that you've talked about is believing with St. Paul that when I am weak, then I am strong, that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And vulnerability is not celebrated in our world. People run from it. And vulnerability, in my experience, is where the seed opens, because you don't have any way to hide, to the grace or to something new coming in. And this can occur in prayer, right? So how do you see that, and what words of wisdom do you have for people who are afraid to admit that they're weak? You know how the world, people try to cover things up or don't know how to open up. What would your suggestion be, and what would your message be to people to encourage them that as things are moving around and disappearing in the world in forms that we've recognized or felt safe in, that internally is something waiting for everybody every day, that welcomes them and offers them a safe haven, a safe harbor, and a replenishment and direction?
Well, instead of making statements, I could just tell a story about how when I was on Rikers Island and dealing with these women who were being treated so terribly, I was at one point getting very, very upset and angry and just beside myself with what am I going to do about all of this? And it happened that I was reading during prayer the scripture where Jesus is in the boat with his apostles, and it was in the Sea of Galilee, and a storm came up, and the boat was tossed back and forth, and Jesus was sleeping, and it said on a pillow. The apostles were very upset, and they went to him and said, "Why are you sleeping? There's a storm out there. Help us." And we don't know why you're not helping us. And I stopped for a minute, and then I said, I know just how those apostles felt. I said, because I feel as though I'm in a boat, with these women, and we're being tossed around, and nothing seems to be happening, So do something. And then I stopped, and I was proud of myself. I thought I really gave it to Jesus. And then I heard something very, very deep. And it wasn't peace be still or be not afraid. What I heard was, who's in charge? And I was just stunned. Who's in charge? I knew that wasn't me speaking. But that was exactly what I needed to hear. Who's in charge? And I then said, Jesus, I know now you are in charge. And I know these things will work out somehow. And truly, that's what did happen. It didn't happen immediately. But as I kept saying, yes, Jesus, I trust in you, things did get better, and women were helped. So I guess that's what I would say about even how to deal with what's going on in our world today. The realization that Jesus is in charge, and that we just have to listen to what we can do, but we're not in charge of this.
Thank you so much, Marion.
Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you for this opportunity. It was fun.
We might bring you back, but I'd like to thank everybody here. And this is Soul Butter with the SuzeMuze, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye now.
Soul Butter, a tiny talk about big things. Light notes from the SuzeMuze.